Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the January 25th, 2023 Abington Finance Committee meeting. I am the Vice Chair, Matt Salva. The Chair, Daniel Eddy, is not here tonight, home with a sick kid. We hope that everyone and their family gets well quickly. Tonight we are continuing our meetings with departments, department heads, town, and region. And we're in a very school-themed night tonight. We have the South Shore Vocational Technical School and we have the Abington Public Schools both here tonight. So we'll look at presentations from both of them. Our agenda says we'll review the minutes from the January 4th meeting. Did those actually go out? Okay, yeah. So we will review the January 4th meeting minutes. We'll go over correspondence, which there were not any. Liaison reports, and then we will discuss the next meeting and schedule from here. So, without further ado, I think we'll invite the South Shore VOTAC to come on up and talk to us about how things are looking for the year ahead and how things have been going.
Thanks, Matt. Good evening, everybody. My name is Tom Hickey. I'm the school superintendent. Joined tonight by your representative to our regional school committee, Tom Petrozelli, and our district treasurer, Jim Coughlin. So thanks for having us back. As you probably know, given that we have a new governor, there's a delay in getting the real numbers that we all care about, which is what's the Chapter 70 number and how does that offset town assessments. But I'm happy to be here at this time of year to talk about the presentation that I made to our school committee back in December. I had hard copies. I don't know what your protocol is. We have to circulate some if that's easier to hold on to. And this is kind of a budget. Thanks so much.
So Tom, while you're passing those around, we have some people who probably have not met you before.
Yes, that's right. Thank you.
Maybe why don't we go around and introduce ourselves?
I'm Sarah Cole. Nice to meet you.
Hi there. Nice to meet you. Hi there.
Matt Salva.
All right.
Chris Murphy. Hi, Chris.
Followed by you.
I'm the recording secretary.
Hello. So is someone kind enough to run the PowerPoint? Oh my goodness, what a treat, thank you. I'll adjust the pacing. I'm not going to do.
We hope the screen's big enough for you to see.
Oh my goodness, yes. Yes, that's the test. I'll go at a very pace here. This is the budget presentation, but it also gives me an opportunity to let finance committee members know that we're in the early stage of the MSBA project, the early pipeline, if you will, forming the project team. I'll speak to that briefly. And also talking about other activity we'll have this spring at our town meetings, which is a regional agreement amendment to expand our district to include the town of Marshfield. I'll speak to that for just a couple of minutes. And I hope you'd be willing to interrupt me if there's a question that crosses your mind immediately. I'd be happy to stop. Thank you. So with the school committee presentation, I start off talking, next slide, thank you, talk about goals and accomplishments. Happy to report that we have a very robust co-op program. You would hope that in a regional vocational school, we'd be able to put kids out working in the local economy in the second half of their 11th grade year or as seniors, and our numbers are through the roof. We've got great cooperative arrangements with employers. We've also enjoyed some recent success in securing competitive grants. The biggest grant we've ever received was in the last half year or so for $2.5 million. Funds will be able to use to refurnish our carpentry and culinary arts program, as well as work on school infrastructure needs. We've also secured a few other grants, $250,000, $500,000. There's a lot of state money out there for Chapter 74 programming. It's not forever, but we're well positioned to secure these dollars. And it has allowed me, it has helped to contribute to reduced supply and equipment costs that I see now and going into the future. From a long-range capital point of view, securing grants makes a difference. When I look at our future capital expenditures for vocational equipment, it's almost negligible for the next several years, which I'm very happy about. But any capital expenses we're having, we're going to keep to a bare minimum given the potential new project. But having these grants has made a big difference. Thank you. When we look ahead, we're always looking to do a better job with all of our subgroups when it comes to accountability measures. We're very happy to have some expanded outreach for English learners to help them and their families through the admissions process. We're post-COVID, we secured some state funding to run some after-school, night school programs. They're called Career Technical Institutes, and we work in concert with the workforce development boards in Quincy and Brockton. And so our school is back to, along with having athletics going on all the time in the gym, we also have several of our shops up and running in the evenings for folks looking to get direct targeted training into the workforce. And I'll speak to the MSBA and the Marshall matter a little bit later. Thank you.
Let's go on accountability.
Yes, please.
How do you try to accomplish that goal there?
Right. First thing you have to do is you have to know your audience, and you have to be able to analyze the data that you have for those subgroups. The state provides a lot of that data, and then in general we target some interventions. So, for instance, if we're talking about student achievement, then we're probably talking about a range of interventions that would involve extra support. We might say after-school tutoring, online tutoring. We try to use some pre- and post measures, so we track kids that go into these interventions and does it make a difference. The state wants all public schools to look at all of their subgroups and not just look at the bottom line. Because we all know that if you're just looking at bottom line improvement, not every group might be growing. But accountability can also be on other measures like reducing dropout rates and increasing school attendance. So it's not just about MCAS scores. But you have to know your kids, you have to know the data, and you have to be willing to review it and see what it says, and make adjustments when something's not working.
Have you seen some growth in the suburbs?
I have. I have. We're no school's ever going to be satisfied, but I think the key is we start by saying we're welcoming in children from 8 towns with varied levels of previous experiences, and if we recognize that, especially in that very vulnerable and important grade 9, we might be able to change the trajectory of what students need to do. So with targeted resources, and again, coming out of COVID with some extra funding, that I think that has helped.
Thank you.
No, thanks for asking. I tell our regional school committee that we build our budgets from zero. This is the 11th school budget I've been honored to be able to bring. And each year I probably had some variation of this slide where we start a zero-based budgeting process in the fall, where we ask our departments to not merely add money onto last year, but to build it from zero. And we have learned a lot along the way when departments are itemizing their costs, and we can track costs and expenditures. And that allows us to work on that with our business office, with Jim and his staff, to ensure that the resources are going in the correct places, so that I'm bringing a rough presentation to the school committee by December. We have to certify our budget 45 days before our earliest town meeting. And that, over the years, Abington's been early, Abington's been late. You're back on the early side of things. Congratulations, you got the gold medal for our 8 towns, I think, if you're on schedule. But Situate's also a perennial April candidate. We're certifying a budget in February. So in a year like this, with a new governor and delayed aid, I can tell you everything about us except what you might want to know. And what Jim has been able to do in the last several years is, within 24 hours of that governor's budget being released, we will be able to crunch that number so we can answer the question, and how much is our assessment going up, please? And we'll be able to supply that, and certainly can come back and have more refined conversations. But I can speak to some projections on that in a little bit. But this year it's a unique year, but the building process is the same. We build it from zero. Thank you.
Can I ask you the
Yeah.
state zero-based budget? When you have contractual obligations, you're not setting on at zero.
From a financial point of view, that is true. However, I would say that in even looking at personnel, we have to continue to look to say, are we doing, so for instance, if we had a vacancy of a 30-hour custodial position, before I would just automatically post for that again, I would want to know, what's the value add? What are we getting out of that position? Should it be 2 part-time positions? Or conversely, does it need to be 35 hours? That way, if we're looking at it regularly, we can reallocate dollars Because the needs we had 5 years ago may not be the same.
And that's an instructional position as well.
Certainly. I've been able to add a fourth teacher to our electrical program, which is our most popular vocational program. We've been turning kids away from that program for years. These are not kids who don't get in. These are kids who get in, and there's not enough space to place them. So I'd like to believe that somewhere along the way, finding grant and budget money to be able to say, we're going to add a teacher, we're going to add a fourth teacher. The most we've ever had in recent memory has been 3 teachers, but here we are in a position that we've been able to meet the demand, get kids into the major they want with adequate supervision. So it may not be a direct line, and yes, you can't just say, oh, well, maybe we're going to English teachers next year, sure, we can zero-based budget. You are correct. Health insurance would be another example, right? We're not changing health insurance plans overnight. But within our discretionary dollars, we look at them from zero.
Okay, that's great.
Thank you. This slide captures most of what's new. The overall aggregate budget increase is 2.25%. That's what we're proposing for fiscal '24. We're waiting on Chapter 70 revenue. Our projection, and this is a similar conversation I would have said last year, is that we have a decline in our non-resident population, which means we have a decline in our non-resident tuition. We have an increase in our in-district kids. And so what happened last year, my comment last year was probably something like, I want to see if the loss of the non-resident tuition, these are kids from outside of our 8 towns, will be matched by an increase in Chapter 78. Last year it was a wash, nearly a wash, which was great because that's what we wanted. And this is what I'm waiting for here. Along with looking for that number, so we're waiting on the governor's numbers to be able to see what that gap is. And what I say to the community is, the committee is, we build the budget based on revenue, and anything else, you know, at the end of the day, that's what you're building on. So this budget is, I think it's a modest budget, meeting our needs, but also wide-eyed that if there's a revenue gap there after we see stated, we'll have to take a closer look at it. There's no debt on the books for fiscal '24. I don't know how many more years I'm going to be able to say that with the MSBA slide. I've got to come up later. But for now, let's just celebrate with that. And so when we break down your town's assessments, there is no debt. The biggest capital item going into the fiscal '24 budget is money set aside for a successor bus fleet. We own our own buses. We employ our own bus drivers. And so we currently have a fleet of 15 buses that we deploy around the district. And I think we did a great job procuring a propane bus fleet in 2018. It served us well. And so the goal would be that before the end of fiscal '24, we'll go back out to the market and look to trade in the fleet we have for a successor lease or purchase arrangement. So it's a 5-year lease. You lease the buses, they're yours at the end, no additional cost. And we should have a better equity stake having those buses to trade in. So that's the single biggest item I would say in the budget unique to this year, and that has served us well. We don't want to retain an aging bus fleet with increased repair costs.
Great. Just out of curiosity, did you have a hard time finding bus drivers to hold on to?
Is there anybody interested in picking up a second job? Can we talk after this meeting? I think we're doing the best we can. Our backup for decades at our school has been that we require all of our custodians to be licensed bus drivers. So they are our built-in substitute drivers, and they do phenomenal work. Wintertime is especially difficult between the needs of the building in the winter. So if we do see a dip in the bus driver market, if perhaps there's another company out there that's offering signing bonuses or things like that, and there is a bit of a revolving door at times, our custodians have always been there to stabilize that arrangement. So, but yes, it is absolutely a challenge. Absolutely a challenge.
I wondered if it was the same with the vocational schools as it is.
Yes.
Everywhere seems to be out there.
We've done some recent research, so we know what the market is in terms of hourly rates, and we certainly know that most of our member towns are contracting that out, and it's not a pretty sight anywhere, quite honestly. Yeah, they do a great job. With the lease arrangement we have, any major maintenance would be covered by the company that we lease the buses from, but the minor maintenance we would be responsible for. Okay. In terms of personnel within the budget, we've got some positions I'm looking to shift, some of them from grant funds and slowly work our way to put these on the budget. COVID, ESSER funds, we've heard of them. We know ESSER funds don't last forever. There's no question it's a game changer to have targeted resources in schools, and it doesn't end just because the grant funding ends. So districts need to be smart about how they move money from grant to budget. I'd be saying the same thing to you about vocational teachers that I'm able to partially fund on grants. You don't want to have it perpetually on a grant. Sometimes, some years you can't afford to move it, but you can make some incremental moves to the budget. So an additional school nurse, a portion of a speech language pathologist, and a portion of a social worker. And I also have an athletic director on here, as it's a long overdue adjustment for us. We have not had a full-time athletic director. It's not a sustainable position to ask a full-time teacher to do this with a stipend. So that's on the operating personnel side. Those are the changes for this year. And I put a line at the bottom of the slide typically to just say that when we build our budget as an entity unto ourselves, we have to build in costs that are generally not necessarily within a school budget. OPEB, unemployment, insurances, et cetera. So that's always been the case. And so when we build our numbers, all of that is baked into our costs. Thank you.
Just a question. Sure. Why the athletic director now? Have you been able to do with other people?
I think we haven't done a service to the athletic program. And so quite candidly, probably would have been, it's made the cutting room floor for me coming to you probably in the last 5 years, that the timing, the priorities of the personnel, where the numbers shake out. I feel we have more students participating in athletics. We have more teams. There are greater compliance needs. So I think I've been able to make the numbers work to make it fit for this year. Thank you. This slide just offers our readers an opportunity to see what grant money do you get. And I talk about the equipment grants, but those numbers are one time. The bottom line summarizes our entitlement grants, and these are not for the upcoming year, but it's just a sense that we do get money to help with vocational supplies. We get special education money, Title I, Title IIA for professional development, and Title IV. All of these dollars are deployed for various reasons. Sometimes it's personnel heavy, sometimes it's supplies heavy. Thank you.
Can I just add to that? Certainly, is that with the grant funding, how concerned are you about it, Cliff, coming in 2 years?
I'm not terribly concerned. When I project grant use going forward, I assume level funding. So I don't have any indication that we would see a major drop off. A lot of these grants are formula based, depending on the number of students, the types of students in the building. But I absolutely do not assume that grants are going to go up with the rate of inflation or go up for some magical reason, which is why every year, if we can employ some zero-based approaches, if I can start moving some expenses incrementally, I can account for inflation. I can account for retirement that has to be built into federal grants. So no, I'm not losing sleep at night over a cliff in the next couple of years. But I want to position us so that if we had to make adjustments, we wouldn't be over reliant. Make no mistake about it, if these grants all disappeared, we have work to do. But I'm not seeing any indications of a major concern in that area.
Are these all government grants?
Yes, these are all federal grants that come through the Department of Education, yes.
Okay.
Thanks. Here's our in-district enrollment trend slide. Abington, first alphabetical order at the top. Abington's up 6 students. You can see, I tend to drop a year and add a year every year. You've probably seen this slide before. But those are the trends that you can see, and there's no rhyme or reason. Our admissions policy of 4 seats to every town, and then we reapportion seats from towns that don't use them. So there's a change. From a financial point of view, if you want to ask, does an increase in enrollment mean an increase in assessment? It generally does. The question is, to what extent? Thank you. Another enrollment slide just showing that we're down to,
Sorry, just real quick, sure, with that. For the benefit of newer members, what is the typical time slice that you look at enrollment for to factor into the towns?
In terms of the most recent October 1 report, is that what you're getting at?
Just when you're, for the formula to determine the town, like each specific town's.
Oh, that. Oh, I got to slide for that a little bit if you want me to get that down. Okay, thank you. 650-ish students is pretty much what we can handle. And so that number is bumping around the top. The light green number that you see in kind of sort of the shape of the bell curve is the change in our non-resident population, where I said earlier the non-resident tuition going down. I would anticipate that a year from now, I'd be able to, I'll show you this slide, and the 33 light green students will probably be as low as maybe 10, and we'll have more in-district students. But the total number probably, it's not like we've got space for 50 more, it's probably going to be hovering around that number for, until we perhaps have the opportunity to have a larger school.
For the several year stretch where it went up significantly, was that because there was less in-district demand?
It was because we had a policy that allowed us to accept non-resident students after a certain application score. There were some regulatory changes, and that's where you see the high water mark. And as each class graduates, we're not replacing, we're bringing in 100% in-district students in grade 9. So now, most, if not, I would say nearly 100% of any non-resident kids that we might admit will be in grades 10 or higher if they're outside the district. But that's in programs with its space.
So, Abington, this may not be affecting you, but like Abington district-wide, we've probably seen an increase in English language learners from about 5 years ago, 75 to.
It's a huge budgetary impact.
Yeah, and does that impact you at all?
Downstream it does, it's certainly in proportion. And that's part of what I had on an earlier slide, that we want to be able to devote resources. We don't want it to be an obstacle to somebody's primary language at home or the needs of English learners. But my English learning needs do not compare to what APS might be dealing with, especially when you could have students entering your system at any grade level.
Okay.
And to Matt's earlier point, and the next few slides talk about how, what goes into an assessment. This is what we'll be sending you. As soon as we possibly can. There are 5 factors that go into a town's assessment. There's the minimum local contribution, and that's what we're waiting for. 80% of a town's assessment could come from that number. In our regional agreement, we tell you how we calculate other items such as capital and transportation and other operating costs. Anything outside that first line, minimum local contribution, is governed by population. So there's a big chunk of an assessment that's a state-driven formula, and the rest of it is essentially governed by recent population trends. Capital is a little bit different than debt. We use a rolling average for capital, and for debt we use a fixed 3-year look back. So when we do get to the point that we're talking here about an MSBA project, and we do talk about when a project's going to be voted on at the school committee level and brought to our towns, that'll be a very important conversation about the look back. So what will be my town's share of such a project? That formula is what we would look to, and we'll be able to do some reasonable projections well in advance of that. Thanks. Excuse me. And when Jim puts his assessment figures together, he'll use a slide and some paperwork similar to this, where we'll show all of our towns and we'll show the breakdown. And essentially this just summarizes that. The first line basically says, we expect more state aid because we have more in-district kids, but we will see a drop off in non-resident tuition. So I'm hoping it's a wash, and we'll have to adjust if it's not. There's no debt. Capital is slightly lower compared to last year, which means everyone's capital share. It's just one number we bring you, so it's all baked into one number. But you'll be able to look and see that a 1-year look back for capital will be lower. I'm hearing rumors that the governor's number will come up before March 1st. It has to come out by March 3rd. I'll take 2 days if that's all it is. That's lovely. Music to my ears. We can't wait. Let's get as close to the truth as we can, as quickly as we can. Thank you. Quick pause and transition before I talk about MSBA. Can I get anything else on the budget front for you? Okay, thank you. So this this is just to let you know that we, after 7 tries, were invited to the MSBA pipeline a little under a year ago, and we are cooking with gas, moving this thing forward.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
We've been talking to you about that for all those 7 years.
Yes, you've heard me whine about that for a long time, yes. And so happy to be in this position. Where are we right now? We've just, MSBA next month will certify our choice of an owner's project manager. We've signed a feasibility study agreement. We know we'll get a little over 55% of any feasibility costs reimbursed by the state. That's great news. We've been setting aside money in the stabilization fund for several years so that we could avoid what I'm about to say now. There's no financial impact to take on the feasibility study. That was my biggest nightmare, to have to say in January after the budget cycle started, well, wait, do I get another bite of the apple? And the answer is no, you don't. So having the money in the piggy bank allows us to say, we're ready. We told MSBA we're ready. And so now we'll spend the first half of 2023 bringing on the design firm. And then we'll get started on design. When might we have something? 18 to 24 months on a very aggressive timeline. Somewhere in fiscal 25, we should hopefully be narrowing something down. Because I don't know, when's the price tag? You know, how can we tell people, you know, I think it's reasonable to say that. But it would be certainly my intention, even if it's nothing urgent, to stay in regular communication with our communities every few months about where we are with this. But for right now, there's no financial impact in the fiscal 24 budget for us to pursue this matter here. Matt.
So we have talked over previous years about what we would be going to MSBA for, whether some sort of expansion, renovation.
Yes.
Any higher project.
I'd like the best, most affordable school possible. And what MSBA says, what MSBA tells us quite honestly is, put aside that money, you've got to study all the options from the base model up to the Taj Mahal. And then you got to make sure it meets the needs of your instructional program, and then do the math. So I've probably unofficially said to people, boy, if we can renovate, you know, if we can save part of it. And then I started looking at numbers, and you all are not strangers to that either. The cost of renovating an existing structure might give you the initial appearance of, oh, we're going to save a bundle. Just the paint, right, and what to do the roof once. And it turns out that the data analysis says the gap between new and renovation is very, very close. So for instance, for us, we have a 1962 original building with a 1978 addition and a 1992 addition. 1990s, we all know the 1990s, we're going to tear something down? Oh my goodness, that's going to be a reaction if somebody says, save that part and knock down the rest. So I'm happy to be in a position to have these conversations when it comes up. I don't know what the right answer is. We're on a very small piece of property. We're surrounded by wetlands. So if we were going to build something new, we'd have to be the visiting team for like 300 years as they build on our athletic fields in the back, and then tear down the building in the front. Or there'll have to be some sort of phased-in approach. So that was a priority for us when we were interviewing owner project managers about their experience with dealing with phased-in construction, new construction, and complicated environmental issues as well. So if I could write the ticket, I'd say, it'd be great to have something new, but it's at $600 to $700 a square foot, those numbers add up pretty quickly. So I think what will ultimately happen is we'll do the same process that they've all remembered here. Right? You look at the menu, you look at the enrollment projections, and then what can we afford? Which transitions very nicely to this slide, because make no mistake about it, the timing of an additional town's interest in having access to vocational technical education could not be better as we are about to embark on a significant project. So this spring, in all 8 of our towns and in the town of Marshfield, we'll have an article on the warrant, hopefully, that will essentially admit Marshfield, and there'll be some terms and conditions. So there's no financial impact now, but there is going to be a financial impact when we talk about what are the terms and conditions for them coming in. This slide here simply points out the glacial pace of getting regional agreements reviewed and approved. But we're in a good spot now because the Department of Ed has done their good work, and we're ready to launch documents out to the necessary stakeholders in all the towns. If things go to plan, by the end of our town meeting sequence, all of our town meetings should be done by the second week of May. And if we get at least 2/3 of the towns to agree, plus the town of Marshfield, the matter goes to the commissioner. So Marshfield could be a member of our district as of July 1st of 2024. Thank you. So where's my coupon? How do we cost share? You bring in a roommate, it must have to help pay for rent, right? It does. So what we said in talking to Marshfield was actually very productive, great people to work with. We focused in two areas in terms of the terms. The first is we have an established stabilization fund, and it is not, I'll use the word not fair, not that they were, just phrase it that way. It is not fair to invite in a new community and then utilize a stabilization fund and allow it to reduce the assessment costs, if you will, of all. So the first thing that Marshfield will do is that they will put some skin in the game and they'll pay a proportion of what we've set aside in our stabilization fund. That will remove the issue of when we do use the stabilization fund in the future, everybody has contributed. It's just that Marshfield has been will be on an accelerated path to make up for lost time, if you will. And then the second piece is the share of the debt. So I'll leave this as kind of like a cliffhanger comment right now. We don't know what the cost of a future project would be, and we don't exactly know when we would have that to vote on, but I think it's going to be around somewhere in fiscal 25. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that any new community that joins us is going to pay what a reasonable person would say is a fair share. If we bring in a new community and fix their debt share after only being with us for, say, 1 or 2 years, they're enrolled. That's the key to all the math. We want to make sure we're taking an adequate snapshot of the math after they've had, and the way we put this together is at least 4 recruited years in the building, because that would be an honest apples-to-apples comparison to all of our other 8 towns who have been in the district since forever and certainly have had 4 years of grade 9, 10, 11, and 12 kids in the building. So I would frame it to you this way. We would, whenever we vote on this debt project, the 8 towns will certainly be looking, we'll crunch some numbers, but we will adjust the numbers as Marshfield enrollment increases and return the haircut to the towns. Because again, the timing of Marshfield being in the district for 5 years and us voting on this, it's not going to match. So I frame it as they're on an adjustable rate mortgage for the first 4 years, and then we're going to fix their debt share and then make the necessary adjustments. Those are the 2 biggest issues. There are 900,000 semicolon changes in the agreement. And I'm pretty sure I had to write MGL versus Massachusetts general laws in order to condense the document. So in serious, there's probably about 65 changes and there are only 5 that are substantive. But it makes for a better document, and I will not be arrested by the grammar police as a result. There are some other changes, but I won't burden you with it, but I'm looking forward to conversations to explain this. This is a win for the district. This is a win for the next 50 years of technical ed in this area. And it's a win for a community that currently doesn't have access to it. So I'm looking forward to those conversations. I've also been invited to talk to the Pembroke School Committee next month, as there may be some increased interest in that community. Should that come to fruition in a couple of years? Maybe the answer is more the merrier. Maybe it's, hold on, let's see where we go one at a time. But it's okay to have that conversation because cost sharing isn't a bad thing.
So that was going to lead to one of my questions, which was, so we know that for the Abington Public Schools, such are vocational technical schools, one of the places that they can go. We have students that go to places such as Norfolk Ag.
Right.
Where do Marshfield students go now?
Marshfield is one of 5 communities in our area that is not affiliated. So Marshfield, Pembroke, Duxbury, Hingham, and Hull, South Shore communities not affiliated with a regional vocational. Their access to Chapter 74 programs would be to apply as a non-resident student. With the change in regulations, there are very limited options, and that's just in terms of in-district capacity. So the answer is, other than an agricultural option, there probably isn't one. Yeah, so that I think is part of the incentive for their interest.
The inclusion of Marshfield, does that just take away from the non-resident students that can get in? Does that have the impact on possibly having students?
Thanks for asking that question. I think that's legit. So is there a downside to it? You know, what's, you know, if you're still 650 kids a year and you're inviting in another town, how does that work? While that is possible, the analysis we've done, and this is, I've probably said this off and on over the years, our district is very lopsided in terms of enrollment trends. If you were to study the previous slide, 4 of our communities make up about 80% of the district: Abington, Rockland, Whitman, and Hanson. So what's happened over the years, whatever Abington's enrollment numbers have been over time, and I would say the same about Whitman and Rockland, there's been an increased interest, but it has been because they have been using seats that have been apportioned to communities that don't fill their slots. So another way of answering the question would be, if Marshfield becomes a member, we would use the same formula. We would look at the number of 8th graders in the town divided by the total number of 8th graders in the district. We would come up with a percentage, and then we would say, how many kids can we take in? We'd say we would take about 170. We would do that math, and we would say to Marshfield, you've been apportioned 23 seats. Now, where do those 23 seats come from? They're essentially taken, if you will, from each of the towns, right? But the towns that are not going to feel that would be towns that are chronically under-enrolled: Cohasset, Norwell, Situate. It's not bad, it's just the way it is. So is there a slight haircut? Yes, for a while, maybe for 2 or 3 years. Because if we are in a position with MSBA, and I should have mentioned this earlier, our enrollment projection that we're going to study with MSBA is a school at least 645, and as many as 975 with Marshfield. Without Marshfield, they want us to study from 645 up to 805. So I think that long term, we bring in another community, we establish the cost of this new building, and then by fiscal 28, we're at a point where I'd say 28, probably maybe 27, where we'll have a larger building where we can take in more capacity, and then we'll see where those numbers adjust.
So if the shine after high school wore off the people, and we decided to go back.
Not possible, but
I think they're like 14 numbers. Does that mean you kids get in?
not at that rate. No, not at that rate. Every town is apportioned a number of seats, and then it depends on which towns aren't using their seats. So believe me, I've had that internal conversation with, what if we're not getting the same access, those same seats? The first thing I would do is look at the community that might be asking the question and say, you might think that you have access to those seats, but if Cohasset, Norwell, and Situate fill their seats, like Situate is currently our biggest community. It has the largest number of 8th graders, but you can see that their numbers are very small in comparison. So it's those seats that are getting reapportioned. But if overnight there was equal demand from all 8 of our towns, Abington and Rockland and Whitman, their access would drop because everyone would be using their municipalities' seats. This is just another way of redrawing that map a little bit, but it's a fair point to make. And I don't know how we fit 975 students, by the way. I just don't know how they happen. So you doing stories for a school, I don't know where they are.
I'm just curious, how close is the 650-ish average enrollment to the actual demand right now?
They were a waiting list of 80 to 100 students. Yeah, so, and the MSBA takes that into consideration. MSBA's job is not to remove our waiting list, because where are these kids going to come from? They're going to come from sending communities, and they're looking to modernize a school, address some increased capacity needs. So it's entirely possible that if we go back to when Matt asked, what are you looking for? We may be able to build the best possible school for 700 kids. Maybe that's what we can afford. Maybe we have to make some targeted decisions on how to deploy the programs we have. But I would suspect that there would probably still be a waiting list even after this. It's the affordability piece. So thanks for asking that. I think Oh, let's hope this is almost done, right? Oh, yes, my goodness, here we go. Yeah, so we had a public hearing in January. We'll certify our budget in February. The biggest missing piece is what's the share. If I were telling you, if you wouldn't hold me to this, to the penny, as a district that has an increase in enrollment, I would probably look at last year's per pupil expenditures, which was around 13,500. There's probably an inflation factor that we have to add on, multiplying it by 6. It's never that simple, and I'm loath to say that because you told us that it was 13. But in all honesty, that's if I had to forecast something in the next few weeks, I had to pencil something, and that's probably where I would look. That's where I would look in the ballpark. I wish, and we look backwards, Jim, we look backwards at numbers and we try to say, hey, let's look in the rearview mirror, can we see any trends? Some years, a town's enrollment can go down, but their assessment could still go up. But I would say that I don't think I'm wildly, I don't think I'm being reckless by saying that in terms of the amount of, the amount of students. One of the factors that all public school districts are cranking about, and K-12 districts even more so, is the increase in out-of-district placements, the inflation rate. We don't have to deal with that. A 14% increase, never mind everything else with inflation. That's a Kroger, right? I think that's absolutely a huge factor. But the other one is this. In the state formula, Chapter 70, the statute says that the legislature can cap the adjustment for inflation at 4.5%. So that foundation budget you hear about and all the money that they're putting into it, they have the right, regardless of the inflation rate, to cap it at 4.5%. What rate do they use for calculations? They use the third quarter of last year. That rate was 9.1%. If you have an opportunity on behalf of public education to talk to legislators and you wanted an elevator speech, it would be don't cap funding Chapter 70 at 4.5%. If they funded at the actual inflation rate, the rate that we're all struggling with, that will put more money into the formula, and there's more state aid. If it's not, guess where the costs get passed down to? So that's an added struggle with such an extraordinary, inflation rate.
We're talking about the inflation rate last year. The last 6 months, the inflation rate has been about 2%.
Yes, and what they use as a marker is the third quarter of last year. And that's probably what the conversations would be like, was that good? But when they're looking to forecast inflation for the fall fiscal year, I don't know why they do this, but that's what I was told. They use the third quarter of the previous year.
The third quarter, annualized back 12 months, not the 3 months of the third quarter. That would be.
So it followed last year, 90% of the late summer will follow last year. That's the number that I'm hearing about from Jesse and my regional schools. So
That number makes no sense.
yeah. So let's hope that if they are factoring in inflation rate, that it's something that is matching what we're dealing with and what you're dealing with. We'll continue to have meetings like this, and as I said, we'll get you specific numbers within a day of the governor's budget being released. Send them through, pass them along. Have to come back if there's anything you need further clarification on. We've got the 45 minutes. I don't know if you want to see me for another year or so. Anything else I can help you with while we're here?
What questions at all?
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yes. All right. So community the schools to order. We have Abington Public School Superintendent Peter Schaefer. Assistant Superintendent Regina Chaltier as well.
Good evening. I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to meet with you and answer any questions you might have. And I'm going to probably end this with the way I'm beginning it, and it's, even though there'll be questions tonight, and maybe lingering questions, Felicia and I are going anywhere. We want to give you the answers to everything. Appreciate the work that you do for the community. Being their representatives to an eye on the fiscal process and the annual budget. So we want to be of service to you to provide the information that you might need. So,
So I will say, I was saddened to read the other day that in maybe a year and a half or so, you are going somewhere.
it's a long way off. Year and a half, I've put in a letter requesting acceptance of my resignation for the purpose of retirement. And, you know, I'm very lucky.
Congratulations.
The work I do. There's not a lot of everything. You know, no, do believe me when I said that, and we do love the talent of the work. So it's a long way off. Focus on this. So, but thank you for knowing that.
Thank you for all the work you put in. So,
I'm going to try to do a couple things for you. You should have all received a complete budget packet from us a month ago or so. I have an obligation to provide a preliminary budget to the school committee the first week in January, so that was built for that point in time. And then I just want to highlight the things here. I promise I'm not going to go through it so you know what's here. We've got the overview of the budget. We've got the development planning schedule. We've got enrollment and class size data in the budget packet. We'll break down of all of our staff for you in this budget packet. Our preliminary budget proposal by accounts, proposed budget increases by major category, specific instructional material that we are looking to acquire. Then we have a preliminary budget proposal document, and then the articles for town meeting. The preliminary budget proposal document is this spreadsheet that provides you a line-by-line breakdown across the district of the anticipated dollars, which I think that it's important for me to underscore for you that this is a preliminary budget. A lot of this won't change because there are costs and we know what they're going to be. There are portions of this that could change, and so what I want to do tonight is give you an overview of the entire budget with Felicia's help, but then also highlight those areas that could potentially change. So as they change, hopefully we'll be able to draw a through line to those in tonight. But it's important for people to know why behind things as those change, because it's January, and as we approach the spring, things will continue to get clearer and clearer in those cost centers. So when I say it's a preliminary budget and underscoring that, I understand that this budget represents a significant increase for schools. We are anticipating, and I want to really be clear about that word, it's important, the word anticipate, an increase in our Student Opportunity Act or Chapter 70 money. We don't know what that is. It was wrong to make a commitment on, it's not fiscally responsible to make a commitment on dollars until you know what they are. But just to quickly back up a little bit, the Student Opportunity Act is money that's provided to schools in Massachusetts to hopefully balance the playing field. I would argue on behalf of Abington, and proven by the Student Opportunity Act, that Abington has not received its fair share of Chapter 70 money through the formula process. The Student Opportunity Act dollars are a way to help balance that. And it's a commitment of recurring funds on behalf of the state to do that for us. Those dollars focus on different subgroups in closing the gaps for those groups. For example, I'm going to talk about our English language learners. I'm going to talk about our special education population. And you will see in the budget proposal that those proposal we have is in line with those Student Opportunity Act dollars. And it's also what we need to do for the kids that we serve. There's also an overview for this. We do have funding from ESSER, that federal money. Those funds will be ending for municipalities, schools, towns in Massachusetts at the end of the next school year. So those dollars were for recovery from COVID to make up for learning gaps. And in doing that, we tried to spend those monies very responsibly. We've had very large summer programs that we've never had in Abington before for academics across all grades. We've had sports, we've had music. The purpose of those funds is to get students and kids back into a regular routine and engaged in meaningful activities. We've also needed them to close learning gaps. So we've hired other people that aren't necessarily classroom teachers, but they're important to the district. Because if we had to eliminate them without funding to back them up, we don't want to get in a situation where we're increasing class sizes, we're incurring that, we're worried about cliff, we're cutting services that we desperately need. So we've tried to use those funds very strategically. That said, in order to use those funds for what they're intended to do, we did hire people. And that we're finding some of those people are positions and things that are of high value to us. And I'll try to, by that time, we'll be Felicia's portion of the budgets, but she'll try to explain that to you. Just making sure I've covered everything on the slide because I don't want to read to you. That'll be a terrible evening. This is a preliminary budget proposal for $30,111,270. It does maintain reasonable class sizes for Abington. We are trying to use what we hope are Student Opportunity Act dollars, which is part of Chapter 70 funding that Abington will receive, but we don't know what those dollars are. We've had an increase of 45 English learners to our high school over the last year. If you remember last year's budget, we put a lot of our response into providing support for English learners because we've seen such a great increase. And so what we've done is we are building as we go. We're not getting ahead of the number of students that we're receiving, but year after year after year, we've increased our population, most especially at Abington High School this last year. Not an overall increase in number at the elementary level, but I can tell you specifically at the elementary level, what we're seeing in our English learners coming to us in the younger grades is they're more challenging for us than we've seen in previous years. We are receiving elementary age English learners that have had zero school experience at all. Not only do they not speak English, but they may be entering the second or third or fourth grade, and they have had no school experience. They've never been to a school in their history. So it's creating additional challenges. We have also, this budget anticipates trying to maintain our commitment to an ongoing replacement of the technology that we use. Our students are using laptops, and if we take 2 grades at a time, and we replace those laptops, we'll get into a responsible ongoing cycle so we don't have this these aging tools that our students use that we all know the devices we use have a shelf life. And there are certain built-in increases, fixed and mandate costs that will automatically cause our budget to increase. When we get into the special education section, the way Tom Hickey described, you may be aware that the Operational Services Division of Massachusetts approved a 14% increase for the private special education placements in Massachusetts. So if for the students that we have in those private special education placements, we can anticipate a 14% increase in those placements. Now, if we've got students at our collaborative placements, like the Northwood Collaborative or Reeves Collaborative, they are not included in that 14% increase. We also have students in those places.
And is there an increase there?
There will be an increase. I've asked both of the executive directors of the 2 major collaboratives that send our students to, if they know what that is. They don't have an exact figure, but I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but when a 4% increase, you're thinking if you have it's a 4% increase, when you look at a 14% increase on the side, they do believe it will be reasonable, but they haven't given the exact number. So I even guess it would be a 4, I don't know, but
I budgeted 5.
Felicia went through 5. Great question. So I'm not going to matter, Felicia's going to continue on for us. And again, I'll invite questions, or if you have questions before Felicia. So I'm not going to matter either way. Okay.
Thank you. Probably should report on I'm going to cover explanations because we have some newer people, the out of district placements and how all that works, so it makes more sense.
Sure, I can do that now, I can get to the increase by major category page.
If you want to do it, but
Yeah, I'd be happy to do it if it fits there. We can do positions first and then we'll do, does that make sense? Okay,
Just, sorry, just real quick, I remembered, I meant to ask Tom when he mentioned it, I meant to ask Peter when he mentioned it. Can you explain what ESSER is?
That would be number one. So in education, we're really good at using acronyms.
Oh, you're not-
Okay, so well, if I do, and you don't, please stop me. One of them is ESSER, which stands for Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief. And that came out post-COVID. So we have ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, which are in play right now. ESSER 2, it goes through this school year, and ESSER 3 goes through next school year. So you'll see some of our positions have been funded through ESSER or partially funded through ESSER through next year. Some are funded through this year in ESSER. And there will be, as Peter mentioned, a funding cliff at the end of FY24 for every school department in the country because these federal funds are ending. So
again, what was
all these, the ESSER federal funds will be ending the September of after 24. So the summer, it's actually September, but let's say at the end of FY24. So you'll see in front of you a list of positions that we have in our preliminary budget. These positions are not necessarily priority order. They're grouped with like positions, if you will. However, the first two, if we were to select priorities right now, tonight, those would be our first two priorities. The first position, I should also say and reiterate, as Peter said, this budget and these positions are our attempt to fund positions that are currently funded by these outside sources and to be responsible stewards of that money and the needs of the district at the same time. So if we could get these positions into our operating budget, these are positions that we believe we need for the success of our students, then that's something we would like to do before we hit that cliff at the end of next school year, FY24 school year. So, however, the first position, which is the middle school teacher at Abington High School, at Abington Middle School, I'm sorry, was only funded for this fiscal year, FY23, through ESSER funding. It was believed when we were initially allocating the grant that it would only be needed for this year to help with a bubble of students coming out of COVID and coming into grades 5 and 6 for their type of service delivery that they needed, a pull-out math and English instruction. And through this year, through experience, it has been determined that we have more students that are going to need support for longer. So this would be our priority position right now for special education service delivery for what this group of students would need for next year. Our second position is a .4 Abington High School English learner position, or EL teacher. It provides EL support and instruction for the increased number of students at Abington High School. As Peter said, we've had a significant increase in EL students across the district, but specifically at Abington High School. So even though we added positions in our budget last year, when we went through town meeting and got through the end of the year, we're like, great, we're going to be in a better position than we were, in August, we're going to be in a better position than we were in June. And then we had additional students moving and we were back to the position that we were in prior to adding the positions. So this is a .4 position for Abington High School. Right now, We have a staff member that is shared between Abington High School and Abington Middle School, and this would provide a point for that position that's at Abington Middle School to go to the high school and have a full FTE, full-time equivalent at Abington High School.
So, Felicia, does that make that individual full-time?
Yeah.
So then it would also incur the cost of the,
Yeah, I always hate to say that, but I believe that would be adding a .4 to a 0.6 position, so health insurance would not need to be added. I say I hate to say that because it's a point, we hope that that person would continue. Right. That health insurance, wild card is always a challenge, as you know.
Felicia, backing up to the first one,
Yeah.
you're saying that it was expected to be a bubble that we would be getting to the end of now. We're clearly not getting to the end of the bubble. Is it still a bubble?
Well, no, now it's
And we're expecting it to be 1 or 2 or 3 more years? Or is it something that we're expecting will be more perpetual?
Great question. We had originally anticipated, as these students came out of COVID instruction, with also special education needs, that we would be able to provide a more intense instructional environment for them for grades 5 and 6 for this year. And then they could be integrated into the current model in grades 7 and 8. And what has been determined through observation and testing is that there's a group of those students that actually aren't ready for a more inclusionary classroom and really need more pull-up services. So is it anticipated that that will be forever? I don't know. I can tell you that it's anticipated it'll be for the next 3 or 4 years till these students are at least through the middle school. And then also watching the students as they are coming up from Woodstown.
And we definitely understand that we're not going to know for a while the full effects.
That's very true.
Kids coming out of what they went through with
That's very true.
education.
Yes.
So,
We're requesting a .5 Woodsdale Elementary School EL tutor that provides support for EL students. The difference between a tutor and a teacher is a tutor provides instruction and a tutor provides support with a variety, maybe in class with a teacher, with an EL teacher, or in a classroom supporting the instruction there. We are requesting a Spanish-Portuguese teacher at Abington High School. Currently, Abington High School offers one language. They offer Spanish. This would be an increase in world language offerings at Abington High School. And it would be a program that it would grow as through level 1, level 2, level 1 Portuguese, level 2 Portuguese, on and on, provide additional program study at Abington High School.
just, I would think that would be helpful for the population of English learners, either see a large population of English learners that speak Portuguese or whatever.
And, there's also, part of offering Portuguese as an academic language. There's students doing with very strong academic first language in the language of English, and the students coming that don't have that same level of academic language, just the same as English. There's students that are really strong academic English, and students who can speak and hear and understand very well English, but don't have a good academic English. So that's where this could be offered. Thank you. So the next 4 positions equal 2.5 FTEs. And these are school adjustment counselor positions. The .5 Woodsdale Elementary School Adjustment Counselor is a new position. We do not currently have a school adjustment counselor at the Woodsdale School. School adjustment counselors support not only students with behavioral and mental health needs, but also support the environment within the classroom. So students that don't have behavioral and mental health needs may be distracted by students who have those kinds of needs within the classroom. School adjustment counselors help the whole school provide an environment that's more conducive to learning. So I think the position, yes.
As far as the mental health needs, is that correlated to COVID? Is there more greater need?
I would say that we have always had a need, and it has become more evident post-COVID. We have absolutely historically had in school and the community had students that significantly have struggled with social anxiety, mental health issues, behavioral challenges, and I think that these are positions that we've honestly could have always used, but it has become more of a need.
So the mental health needs of students in this district have been understood in the past.
I believe that is true. We have the middle school and high school, we bunched those together, 0.5 adjustment counselor at Abington High School, 0.5 adjustment counselor at Abington Middle School. Currently, 0.5 of each of those positions is ESSER funded. So we have a 0.5 funded out of the general fund budget at both of those schools. And we have 0.5 out of both of those schools funded by ESSER. So we would be looking to fund the full FTE, full-time equivalent, through our budget. And at Beaverbrook Elementary School, we currently have one school adjustment counselor, and that is 0.5 half funded through ESSER and half funded through the general fund, and we would be looking to fund the entire position through the general fund.
So with those three positions,
Yep.
you're saying good people already there.
Yes,
Right now, they're funded through ESSER.
Yes.
So we're not adding a person, we're just simply moving them ESSER into the regular budget.
that is correct.
Oh,
That is correct.
Somebody else have a question? Just noticing that you have an adjustment counselor at Beaverbrook, currently one at the middle school, one at the high school. Why did you have one at Woodstown?
At the time that, the time that we wrote the grant there, the team at the time felt the students were being served in other ways by the school psychologists, we actually had social work interns that were able to provide that service. And it has become very apparent that we do need a school adjustment counselor at Woodstown. I should also note that, again, not just in Abington, but there's an increase in homelessness, there's an increase in students in care of the state. Those students come to our schools every day, and they, I'm not saying that all students that are homeless have mental health challenges, or that all students in foster care, but those students oftentimes do come with other problems that other students of intact families don't have. And so we're seeing more of that when we talk about, is it different today than it was 3 years ago? Those are some differences also. We have a list of other positions that were considered in the budget process but didn't raise to our top priority level. But worth, I think, noting that these list of positions of 0.4 wellness teacher, another English language teacher, Portuguese translator, an administrative assistant, an additional high school English teacher, an art teacher, and a nurse to be shared among our schools are all positions that that we would love to have, but haven't risen to our top priority positions. So, This is where we talk about our increases to different categories within our budget. So we have in our salary account contractual obligations, the amount that our salary account's going to go up based on our steps, years of service, lanes, which are education, and our cost of living increases we anticipated being $1,064,234. The new positions that I just laid out are $370,455 for, and we budget for the average teacher salary when we hire some more expensive and some less expensive, but I budget for a master's 6 years, which is about the average of when we take everyone that we hire and where they fall. So in our salary account, we anticipate going up $1,434,679.
Do you have any offsets for retirement?
We have one right now that we believe to be that has indicated retirement. I do anticipate we'll have at least one more, and we may have more than that, but we have not taken a retirement offset yet. And what a retirement offset means is that we take the teacher that's retiring, their salary, what they're retiring at, and what we anticipate hiring somebody else at. It has become, it used to be, if someone retires at the top, you bring someone in at the bottom, and you save $30,000. That has not been our experience necessarily over the last few years. Just like every other profession, I would say, it's been more challenging to get teachers and employees in general, and teachers have come in with more experience and education, and that's how they get more money. So, So programs with other districts, this was the question that Barbara asked around special education. So we have students in Abington that with special education students that we educate either in our schools, in a collaborative placement, which is a public school that is made up of member districts that have special education programs that the member districts can send their students to. Honestly, kind of like VOTAC. Members are part of it. We do pay tuition if we have students that go to a special education collaborative, but it's a lot less money than a private placement. So in the array of student need, the least restrictive environment for a student is to keep them in their home school. That's what we always want to do. If we can provide their service in one of our schools, we're going to provide the service in one of our schools. The next least restrictive is to go to a collaborative. And there's a number of collaboratives on the South Shore that we would send our students, have students go to. And then the final, what they consider most restrictive, is a private placement. We have students who are in private day schools, and we also have students that are in private residential programs. So we in Abington have students that are in a private residential placement for 365 days a year that provide both education and behavioral or health or other services for those students, and we pay for those students. So our tuition that we listed there is what we believe our increase today will be for next year. So our Director of Student Services, Dr. Robbins, in November and December, meets with special education teachers, team chairs within the buildings, our other district liaison, and he makes an estimate, a guess of where our students will be next year. So there might be students that, I mean, totally make this up, there might be students at Woodsdale that we're keeping them here, they're doing marginally okay, but there's a concern with additional expectations put on that child or behavioral challenges that they may end up in a collaborative next year. So he's going to build that in right now in January as part of his increase, because there's a chance that student's going to go. As we move through the spring, there's a better understanding of those students and how they're doing. Same thing for students that are out of district. There might be a student in a collaborative that is having a challenging time and might need to go to more restrictive placement, might need to go to private placement. And again, those pictures become more clear as we go through the strike. We may also have a student come back from the out of district placement. It's unusual, but it does happen. A student is in a collaborative, doing very well. They've developed skills, they can be successful in the public school building. In addition to the two built-in tuitions, as was spoken about, OSD, Operational Services Division, has approved a 14% increase for private special education placements for next year, which is a significant impact. And I have budgeted a 5% increase for our students that are in collaboratives. The second, back one more, sorry, thank you. The other important piece of special education is circuit breaker. And circuit breaker is a reimbursement program for the Department of Education for students that are placed out of district. So I'm going to use general numbers. I'm pretty close, but the district has to spend the first $49,565. The district, I'm going to say $50,000. The district pays the first $50,000 of any student that goes to an out-of-district placement. You own the first $50,000. And then for every dollar over $50,000, in the following fiscal year, you get money back. You get, some years it's been 50%. The state law says 75% reimbursement. And that's dependent radically every year. So
Has it been 75%?
the last few years actually has been 75, but we don't know that. It never, typically what happens is they say 72, 73. And then the next year, in May, they realize that there's 90 left, and they bring everyone up to 75. But you don't know that until the very end. So I have estimated our circuit breaker at 72% for next year. I do anticipate it's going to be 75. That's been part of the Student Opportunity Act, is a fully funded circuit breaker. I can anticipate it until I see it. It's hard to, like Barb said, it's making promises before. So also the part of the Student Opportunity Act is they are reimbursing a portion of special education transportation, which is another very volatile piece of special education. I can tell you over the last year, it's given the fifth graders in terms of the cost of special education transportation. It's very hard to find vendors. When you do find vendors, they're setting a price. I had a question about this. In other years, there's been a negative number next to circuit breaker, which means that we would have gotten, this means we're anticipating less money in circuit breaker for FY24 than we received in FY23. And part of that is about student placements and students aging out, and then adding more students next year. It's really timing and stuff. We have a few students that are aging out, and we have other students we anticipate going into those seats for next year.
Felicia, what's the date? Because the other caveat is that you are responsible for students that moves into town by a certain date, even if, that could
Your meetings, you all have to say,
$250,000 to your budget because it's an out-of-placement private residential.
It's like Barb heard this before.
very good, thank you so much. So in the state of Massachusetts, if a family moves across town lines in the state of Massachusetts, and you have a child that goes to a collaborative, we have one with a collaborative, son to a collaborative, one very collaborative, regardless of when you move, if a student moves from Rockland to Abington, regardless of when that is, we own their tuition, even if we didn't budget for it. If someone moves in it's April 1st, so if someone moves from Rockland to Abington after April 1st, then the next year, Rockland owns their tuition. So if they go to a private placement, so if they're at a, like $160,000 a year placement, they move to Abington for 1 year. Rockland continues to pay for their tuition, although we oversee their education. But they pay, we oversee their education. The caveat to that, however, is if you move out of state. So someone moves in out of state, regardless of when that is, the town that they move into is responsible for their special education. So that could be a collaborative placement, that could be a placement within our schools, or it could be a private placement. And we have had, in Barnesville region, we have had students move in October from Hawaii, and they go to a private placement that costs $225,000. And we're responsible for that.
You haven't budgeted for it because you have not yet, you don't know.
That's correct. So that April 1st is a pivotal for within the state. Out of state, we never get into testing. But even collaborative today, collaboratives are still $60,000. So, and we talk about it like, first is $250,000 is great, but you could have 2 or 3 students move in that are collaboratives already. We talk about $150,000 plus transportation is what we have in budget.
On this slide here, lack of a term, fixed costs like contractual obligations and then the programs of the district. Those were budgeted purposes, you look at those kind of fixed costs.
Absolutely.
The new positions is something where it's like that we negotiate, those going to be interrupted. But unless you're going to reduce taking out contractual obligations, is that going to go?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. And we have to provide special education services. And so that's also a fixed cost. The next set of fixed costs are other school services. There are transportation contracts that we're engaged in. We anticipate our transportation contract going up $53,938. Our contract is going up 3%, but we also have a fuel escalation clause in our contracts that we own a percentage. If it goes up or down, both parties, don't move on, it goes down. More than 10%, we get a refund. It goes up more than 10%, we pay the low rate. We've all seen increases in our fuel bill and diesel, which is even more. So I have built in a 4% increase on transportation costs. Special education transportation, additionally, anticipating a $49,355 increase. I spoke a little bit earlier about the challenges in special education transportation, and this is an indication of that. Typically, but this is actually using some of these are actual numbers that we saw a significant increase in special education transportation in the first half of this year. The costs have just gone up exponentially.
Do you think because they have such a hard time finding drivers, or what do you think is driving that?
I think it's twofold. I think equipment costs more money, repairs cost more money, fuel costs more money, and getting drivers is costing more money. You see the signs, don't drive for us. And because of that the going rate is, we go up, we have a student who needs special education transportation, we send a request out to 10 vendors. We'll hear back from 0. Dr. Robinson and I will call and say, please, can you reconsider this too? And they will, but, we've had good luck with the vendors reconsidering, but it's also challenging to put your equipment on the road. You establish service at the beginning of the year, you have changes during the year, that they get equipment, that you do training. It's special education component. And that includes homeless transportation, foster care transportation, which is very challenging. So another fixed cost of other school services of $103,293. We, as Peter spoke about laptop replacement, we are a one-to-one district, which means that every student in grades 5 through 12 is provided with a device, with a laptop. This $200,000 represents students receiving a laptop in grade 5 and also then receiving a new laptop in grade 9. So they would have their laptop for 4 years. It's a responsible replacement process. When a laptop is then turned in after 4 years, some laptops will have life left and some won't. Those that have life left will be repurposed in grades K through 4. And we have, in every classroom, they now have a set of computers. They don't really want other students have laptops. And those that may not make the cut to make it into a classroom, parts are used to rebuild other computers. Our technology director, Ms. Frankowski, has been very diligent in the selection of laptops that parts he tries to stay with a vendor, that parts can be reused, at least for a cycle or two. But as we know, technology changes all the time, but that's his goal. He analyzed them for screens or keyboards. And then we have an increase of $49,219 for instructional materials. And those are requests from our department heads and principals for new materials, technology, subscriptions, and we're going to instructional materials as well. For an increase of $249,219. To go, to answer your question about where you get there in terms of fixed costs, it's the $249,000 fixed cost. It isn't. However, as a community, we have to decide about laptops and laptop replacements. And by getting out of a regular cycle will cost us more money. And so that's a total increase of $2,371,494, 30.55%. Or, and again, very preliminary budget.
And I know there's too many voters approved on this. Now, that laptop replacement, is that a priority for the school committee? Really come down on that. I know they approved it, but it's like, is it something that they're pushing that is an absolute priority that needs to be in operation budget for the school department?
My concern about it not being the operational budget, it being funded, this past year was funded as a capital item. My concern in the short term, how it's funded, the funding source, as long as we get our laptops, is relevant. Long term, the concern is, if the economy really turns, are we getting out of the laptop? Are we getting out of the one-to-one? Because that's what would happen. And for our students and our community, in 2023, to not have technology available for our instruction, it's not good for our kids. So, short term, capital funding, maybe. Long term, I personally think it needs to be an operation budget, just as a fixed cost. It's the cost of doing business in our schools.
So, you want to see what is the priority for the town, where we think about that, buying laptops, getting this.
Yeah, and whether it's, that is a dumb one, because, again, if it's something that needs to be replaced, and we have to do it over and over again, in one sense, it makes sense that it becomes part of the operating budget. But, technology is one of those interesting things. And sometimes, as things advance, the prices might go down, they might last longer, enrollment might go down. There's all sorts of things that will affect that. The flexibility of having it in the capital plan, and we have a really nice, robust capital plan now, putting it into that long-term plan does give us that flexibility, which brings you to that point that if we have to make that choice at some point in the future of what can we do, where are we going to put our priority then? Are we going to not fund it and then they end up behind? But on the same token, if it's in their own budget, and the economy is that bad, they're still faced with that same choice. What are they going to do within their own budget? Or are they going to, at that point, say, we have to increase, or we have to ask for some capital or.
So right now, again, it's preliminary, not knowing what our, chapter 70 numbers are going to be. In a perfect world, we get a $1,000,081 revenue coming our way when the dust settles, we figure out our revenue out, we get our state numbers, and we go forward and say, yeah, okay, well, maybe this is the end that we do with that. And this is going to, you're expecting this
Yes.
every year.
Yeah, so
They need 200,000.
So as we discussed with fire and we referenced with police, this is similar to, like with police, it's similar to cruisers where we buy them every year, we spend capital on them every year. If we're doing it every year, is it an operating cost? And should we include it as an operating cost? Because it is every single year and it is part of operating the department. And we haven't really come to a conclusion on that. We haven't really.
So it's a topic of discussion in almost every
Anyway, yes.
I mean, we don't books as capital, and we replace books regularly.
Yes.
To me, we now,
I-
laptop is,
I will point out, Chris, there have been years where we treated books as depending on where we were at with the budget, we have had to do that. We prefer not to do that. We prefer to have that. And I know personal preference would be to have this as part of the operational budget, but that is personal preference, not necessarily the preference of the committee or the department or the.
Financially, what are the benefits to it being in the budget financially?
It's, one of the questions is it capital, if it's done here. But this, I think, this financially, having it in our operating budget is part of the business that we do every year. And if we get to that time that we have to make tough decisions, then it's the school committee that's making those tough decisions around what are our priorities? Yeah, what are our priorities? I will say that Scott has been great. We have made moves in the last few years to balance budgets of taking some textbook adoption, putting it in capital, it's 1 year, technology, the commitment to technology. In Abington, it's the difficult decisions yearly that have to be made, and by putting them in the operational budget, it ensures that it becomes part of our operation, and then is it the fixed cost or?
And I will say, as Peter's moving to the platform, that we on the committee, those of us who've been here longer, have appreciated both your flexibility with it and the town manager's office flexibility with it, where you guys have worked very well together in the past to try to come to what works for that particular year's budget.
So, this just doesn't need me to say this, it's just a different angle on this. We came out of the pandemic better than the average school system in Massachusetts. And I think that's because we hit, if there's such a thing, I've said this before, as a sweet spot for the pandemic, the school department was positioned in the best possible way because the construction of the building. The construction of the building came with technology that provided for distance learning that our students needed that other kids in Massachusetts didn't necessarily have. We had the equipment for that learning. And our scores reflect that in Abington compared to other systems. And, obviously it goes without saying that graduating our students with competence with technology is critical. As a matter of fact, the reason we push the technology down to the elementary level is the more literate students can become with technology and use them as learning tools, the learning skills that they develop with technology, the faster they learn the information. It's almost like similar to reading to learn. So I don't have anything to counter if they should do a good job with that. It's just a different angle on that. The most important piece is the acquiring the technology, maintaining the technology levels that we have. We're trying to be fiscally responsible by having it be a piece of the operational budget. That typo on that slide, it's making me crazy. I made this line and I didn't put a dollar sign in front of it. It makes $2, and I needed to acknowledge that. I just had to.
I will say, in her defense, the dollar symbol is implied.
So same question, Scott. Financially, what is the benefit to having it in the capital?
The only benefit is the flexibility, and that's exactly what the concern is. There may be a benefit
Flexibility of,
of not funding, the flexibility of not fully funding it, the flexibility of saying, look, this year we actually could probably get away with $150,000 in laptop replacement because the guy's been really great at keeping them up and whatever. Or the flexibility that, the laptops that they're making now actually get us an extra year out. That's really it. I mean, so what else, maybe there's a different 5 years from now, maybe these even laptops that we're looking at, it's a totally different piece of technology.
So question on that end, as we're going through the budget process and you're working with each of the departments, we're meeting with each of the departments, and as mentioned several times, it's a preliminary budget, it's not the final budget, it's not the town manager budget, it's not the finance committee voted budget. We haven't even touched the capital plan yet. If it were in the capital plan, if it were in the department budget, as we're getting to the end of the budget process, and we were getting a better picture of where we were at financially, we could, in theory, change it in either place.
Yeah. So, no, I mean, we've already started those conversations, and certainly we will continue those conversations. A lot is going to, or at least in what I'm going to advocate for, what I would expect my final budget to look like. It really, it's going to be March, it's going to be in February. And, we'll continue to go through, as we have with our departments, and we continue to meet with our departments to make sure we address their needs well. Our revenue numbers are chapter 7 was our restricted, and those are key to figuring this out, as you guys know.
So that is good information for the newer people. This is their first time going through this budget process, and for people watching at home as well.
And my news on that one is, I just attended the Mass Municipal Conference, and we had an address from the governor, from the lieutenant governor, from Sean Cronin, the Division of Local Services, and they're all telling us, and they're all saying that they are committed, and then we've heard to say, hey, they're committed to fully funding these things. So they're committed to getting us preliminary numbers late February, third week of February, overall engagement. They're committed to having the numbers budget filed on time, which is March 3rd. So that's good news. We'll see where it goes, but
One of the other things that I will put up, because this is a question that has come up from people both on the committee and outside in previous years, when we're looking at a department preliminary budget of $30.1 million, and we're talking about $200,000, it may seem like that's a very small percentage and a small amount, but as we discussed early on in the process, there is a very large portion of that budget that is fixed at $200,000 that there may be ability to wiggle with for a lot of areas in the budget.
it's actually
There's that kind of,
good news to that is,
so that's what
this is a commitment to
right. And that's,
get that on.
yeah, and that's just pointing out that's why we're spending a lot of time discussing this and
29 plus $1 million.
yeah.
I just want to point out that So the flexibility is just who owns the flexibility, right? Whether the town owns the flexibility or because the school department can make those same flexible decisions that
It is,
outside
but
maybe.
I go back to my previous comment. The department and the town have worked very well.
I was just gonna say.
Have been really on the same page the entire time I've been on the committee, and I think it's a real testament to the work both Peter and Felicia have done, and that Scott has done, and Scott's predecessors have done to create an environment where it's not kind of pitting one department against another. It's really working together with everybody to find the right things that work for the particular year's budget. So,
We've been very, I would say, lucky to have the partnership that we've had, and you said that in another way we have, for the school department and the town, we're at the table together. I would say we're on the same team, just like different positions. You know, we all work for the town, we all work for children, we all work for the community. We have different things that we advocate for, and at the end of the day, in my tenure, Peter's tenure, just what I can say for many years, we've come to town meeting with a consensus budget that we're not going to be happy with. Let's say not necessarily happy, but we have come to an understanding at the table about the both sides, what the schools need and what the town needs, and again, kind of like negotiating, no one leaves in high five, like, ooh, we did great. But it's clear and transparent and open discussions about the needs.
I want to walk away with everyone the same amount of upset.
Yes.
So half a dozen of 1/6 of another, that's really not a, I was looking for an edge somewhere, either financially or that would lean in one direction or another.
So I think to that, if we were in a state, if we had a not state like Massachusetts, state condition with a history where we were always scraping and never having a healthy free cash balance to fund our capital projects, we would probably look at this a little bit differently, and there would be more consternation over this than there currently is. I think the way that the town's budgets have been run over those, at least the time that I've been on, probably around the same for the time, full-time that you've been on, maybe not the full-time, but maybe you were on some worse times than I was.
It was not the
But-
partnership
Yeah.
when I first came on, but between the school side of things and the town side of things, so.
I think everybody, and I mean everybody has worked really hard.
Yes.
I think it's all hypothetical look at, so the non-group law is that's, no, we're not taking the 2.3 million. We're taking the $2,171,494. $200,000 the last time that we passed. Would the school department commit to that budget of $200,000 in elsewhere?
So I don't know if that's necessarily a question that Peter and Felicia can answer here tonight. One of the things that I will say, and especially for people either watching at home, newer people on the committee, is the number that's in front of us right now will change between now and when we're actually voting on the budget. And there's a lot, and that will be the case for each of the departments that we go through pretty much. There's a lot of work that goes in behind the scenes. Scott, the various department heads, the financial team put in. So there's a lot of wiggle room, and not wiggle room is not the right word, but there's a lot of finagling done to get all of the numbers to the
He's trying to make a point though.
But I do understand
I
that.
want to know what the recommendation would be, but I can't tell you what the final decision would be without a broader consideration. I know I would be responsible to make a recommendation. My recommendation would be that as Felicia mentioned, that the Portuguese Spanish teacher is probably the lowest priority in the budget positions we put forward. We'd probably move that down. We'd probably try to find cost savings where we could. We might reduce that purchase amount, but we would still find a way to get into that ongoing cycle. We're punishing those computers because we don't want to get into a cycle of having 4 grades to have to replace the computers rather than the 2.
That's a bigger hit.
It's going to be a $400,000.
I have a question that was, just to kind of get, like, if we make this a priority, is it truly a priority? At $200,000 a year, you say, well, we don't give you everything, well, then I'm not going to spend $200,000. No, we want to give them like $200,000 of laptop replacement, and you're saying, well, and you know it's different because we only approve one number. School department and school committee is responsible for the budget detail on it. But I just trying to gauge the commitment, the priority, because it's like, we can all say, well, it's, Scott says the priority, Selectman says the priority, finance committee. But if you get the funding to say, hey, listen, here's $1,000 to get used it, well, we might do something else. Well, then maybe you'll have not the priority.
But I feel obligated, I feel that all questions are fair, and I feel obligated to do my best to answer all questions. So I'm trying to answer it with the recommendation I would make. I know I said it, we might try to reduce as much as possible, but still move forward, find a way to fund that.
So we get that to not by the magnitude, by the over 90, and I don't think, and again, we haven't talked about it, but I don't think we would cut existing staff to fulfill a lot. Or we might not fill one of the requested positions.
But even the bags, we talked about the bags,
Yeah.
they save us money because our students are really responsible with the computers we give them. We don't get crushed. Like we're not replacing computers that are crushed because somebody with a homework or, left them on the back of a car or throw away. That,
1,200 kids carry the laptops in the back. And I think that just does.
it's not always the backpack, but a lot of them is the bag we give them, but they're responsible users.
But I appreciate you kind of answer that, but it was looking for, well, I can't really answer that. But I think it's appreciate it.
Are there any other questions?
Other questions before we should move on? Okay.
That's our budget presentation. As Peter said, and I'll reiterate, we are not going anywhere. We're here to answer your questions. You can call, you can email, I'm happy to meet with anybody. And you have,
Do you have warrant articles?
yes, we're in the packet, but we have,
I'd say that because I'm looking at the.
yeah, thank you, sorry. We can go over to
You have that one.
Thank you, that was great. We have the warrant article for our annual town meeting amount, our budgeted amount that again, between our town meeting, sure, some changes to it. We have a warrant article for our district vocational transportation. We have, for those of you, we have students that attend our district vocational schools, such as Norfolk Agricultural School and possibly Bristol Ag vocational school. And we are responsible, as a non-member district, we are responsible for transportation to the students that go to those districts. I organized a collaborative bus that is with 12 South Shore communities. We have about 8 stops on the South Shore, and those communities bring their students to the bus stops, and then there's 2 buses that go to Norfolk in Walpole. And the bus costs 2 buses are about $160,000, so it's split between the communities. So that one article for $16,016 is to pay for that transportation. We have the continuation of a revolving account to fund substance abuse prevention. It's funded via fines that are levied against Abington businesses, which violate state or tobacco control laws. And so the amount of $8,000, it's not how much we spend, that's just the maximum that revolving account can ever be. And there are 3 more articles. I also included in our budget packet, our FY24 capital plan, which includes and identifies the items that are on the town's comprehensive capital plan.
And your amendment?
Except for warrant articles. Thank you.
How much do you like saying that?
We can send, we'll send, I thought Dr. Stowe, we can send them over for you. Oh, you do, okay, great. Other,
One more question, sorry. That's regular education bus contract. We're right back with that and.
so we need to do a collaborative contract. We go out to bid with Whitman Hanson Regional School District. And we do that because it increases the number of buses that we're looking for in our contract, which makes us a more appealing area to bid. That being said, we usually get one bid, and that's from First Student. There's a bus barn in Whitman that all of our buses get stored in, and that's where the central location for the bus contract is. We are in year 2 of our bus contract. Of the 3-year, 2 1-year options. And we, like I said, it's part of our contract. I worked really hard with other schools around language and the bus contract that can keep our costs down. And one of the recommendations was, I don't care if the buses are new, give us all buses, like, it's not gonna cost us a lot of money. But then come to find out, aging buses actually cost you $100 more money because of the repairs. And downtime for the number of buses, they bring in more spares. So we were able to write the specs of the contract that said a whole new fleet over 2 years. So it didn't cost the contractor as much money up front to have all new buses on day 1 of the contract, or all new buses on day 2. So by now, 100% of the fleet, of the regular fleet, are new buses. There are spares that are in that aren't brand new, but there were a number of cost savings like that. And that was the biggest one, was the age of the fleet. And then flexibility on, there were some tweaks at the time that saved us money. It's not costing us more money, but the fuel escalation clause, the language of that, both sides want to be protected in the case of fuel escalation. And so I still think it was a good idea to how we looked at the clause. And again, I consulted with a number of other districts on the language of the clause, but when gas prices spiked like they did, communicate well with it.
So,
You run the risk of not performing, you know.
Yeah, their cost would be so huge.
so Superintendent Hickey mentioned propane buses, which I was surprised hearing. Is that something that we have investigated at all?
We have not, been here too, with probably 3 more. It's, I've heard a lot of electric buses, which is another, the infrastructure around, what I've heard around setting up for electric buses for the contractors is exorbitant right now. Some districts are requiring I don't know any district that's 100% electric. I know some districts, some percentage of their fleet, they're required to be electric. And I think that's going to be a play. Let's see how it plays out. I'm guessing in the next 10 years, there's going to be a lot more electric vehicles.
You see the big jump in between contracts.
Yeah.
Contracts, so involved in the middle of the contract would be the time to try to change it.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, we're in the middle of a contract with a 5% increase in new contracts. We're seeing big double-digit increases. Part of that are their contractual obligations. There's
The 2 1-year options, there are options on both sides.
yes, yeah,
We don't have to
yes,
take it.
yes, yes.
Which,
They still, for some reason, worry about
That has not been my experience, yes.
I feel like they still worry about other players coming to the table in terms of bids, so they often want to maintain like the extended contract. But we haven't seen that historically. It's just a few.
And I think the next 3 years are gonna say a lot about our economy, our workforce, our inflation, any contract that we have may not be able to be sustained at the rate. They may, so. We have been happy with our students, I think that, the department, they were department with us to COVID, negotiated for COVID, huge COVID reduction, again, the closure, and we went back 4 days, that wasn't part of our contract, and, so.
Other questions?
The size of the schools, the student population, you gave us the numbers for this year and last year, and the high school went down this year. But, middle school seems to be tilted a little higher, but it doesn't seem like they've reached a peak or.
So every year, you want to talk, I don't have the front, but every year we do a demographic study with NESDAQ to project out. And we have not seen huge increases right now. We are leveling off of it. However, our enrollment is also really dependent on the growth in Abington. So, and the change of homes and families as the older community, the older residents sell and the residents come in, even without growth, without the building, where there's that depending on the real estate market. So right now we're at the level, yes, there are ebbs and flows among grades. We have the bubble among grade. We have the middle school a little bit higher this year, the high school a little bit lower. But we for a while, for a number of years, we're seeing year after year increases, especially at high school. Graduating 100 students, bringing in 140 in ninth grade. So our enrollment, but we have seen changes in our demographic and the needs of the students that we're receiving. So while our enrollment may be more flat, the population's needs are higher, which is part of that student opportunity act.
But I'm thinking of the space. There's no reason to believe that space right now, and we can't predict 5 years from now, but in the next few years, there's no reason to expect the space to have to be increased.
And the high school,
Yeah.
I would say that's a true statement.
Across the district.
I would say, let's start at that. So, and Tom, I got him a little late, but he was talking about MSBA and building size, and we fought with MSBA to build us, allow us to build a larger building, and they are very strict on their size. We are, all of our spaces are used at pre-K and high school. There's not an empty space. We've created some offices that we weren't offices before. We have 2 and 3 teachers scheduled in the classroom based on their schedule, not scheduled at the same time, but you couldn't space. Our occupancy for teachers is very high across the school. And I would say the same for people working with staff. We are not overflowing, but we are full. We have, we're not today asking for portable classrooms. We're not putting classes up on the stage, but every space is used. We have some spaces at Beaver Brook and the Woodsdale School that are split with like 5-foot dividers because there's 3 small classes in one classroom. So again, we're not bursting, but we're full. And if we had, depending where the increase was, if we had, 20 student increase in an elementary grade, we could be seeing some challenges around space. We have some elementary teachers, specialists that are on a cart that travel from classroom to classroom to different places. Any other questions?
And just one more. I noticed in one line of the positions that there's no security positions. Is that covered by the town somehow, or?
So the Abington Police Department has assigned 2 school resource officers to the school department. And that's what that security line is. The categories that are listed in our budget are categories that the Department of Education has identified. Some schools have their own security. A number of years ago, we had someone who oversaw school security for us. But right now, school resource officers are part of the police department and assigned to the school.
Okay.
Thank you.
I just want to say thank you. I started, we're letting you know, so we'll come back.
Thank you very much.
All right, that takes us through our primary agenda for tonight. As mentioned, beginning next is reviewing the minutes from the January 4th meeting. Which may be a copy of the minutes. You didn't capitalize Marty's L. It's fine, so good. It's all right. Is there any motion for the meeting minutes of January 4th?
Motion to approve.
It's a motion approved from Chris. Barbara and Marty were not there, so someone else other than those two will have to second the motion. Seconded by Sarah. Is there any discussion on the meeting minutes? Got it.
I do. I do. I'm hoping minutes, and then also just minutes in general.
Well, one thing is start with specific and we'll go to
We
general
don't have a reference to exhibits in here. And we have a reference to what's included first exhibits. And that's required.
Okay.
And what you guys didn't mind, I like, to me, Kelly, you were great job, that what you take are unbelievable. But I don't think it serves us to have this many notes, and I don't think it's really, one, it's not required, and I don't think we should do it this way. Because Matt, all we need to guy, all we requires is summary.
Okay.
I would say that's a small, so.
Yeah, because it's like,
To make life easier for Kelly.
it says, a summary of the discussions on each side of the minutes. And then take the whole document, identify the minutes, all documents that are used at a meeting, unless we came in accordance with second, but they don't have to be attached to the minutes when we post them.
I will say in Kelly's defense, this is not word for word transcript, so it is a summary.
Well, I expect that, you know, I don't know, we actually got
I would say at the start, starting with more and paring down is probably easier. I would say that would be a conversation you can continue to have with Daniel.
Right,
And that I'll continue to have with Daniel.
I just wanted to, we were talking about that, because the minutes are only supposed to just identify the actions that we're taking, the discussions that we have.
They're only
It's a open meeting law.
It should give somebody who, practical reason for it, somebody, whether it's me or any average citizen who wants to look back on this, whether it's next week, next month, or next year, should be able to get a sense of what was discussed at that meeting. Any votes were taken, that those should have votes have to be votes definitely have to be in minutes. So, but for, like I said, again, for practical reasons, and I find this to be very helpful, because I go back to selecting minutes. I mean, it's a lot different now because you can find it all on YouTube and AppCam anyways, but certainly they have enough substance in there to get an idea if there was, there was a pretty good discussion here on capital. on the laptops, and they, so, yeah, so we don't want it verbatim, but you do want it.
Well, you can see the whole video. You can't scan it though.
Right.
Like meeting minutes, you can scan if you're looking for something specific. Just for instance, it's been during like particularly difficult financial time, a former, somebody that was formerly involved in different aspects of things that had some information that we were looking for, say, $20,000, or it was really tight budget. And he said, you can do such and such, this sort of golf, anyways, that none of us here knew that. That is definitely something though, that if you were like going through meeting minutes, you would see that basic discussion, like this can be done, or, it wasn't a vote, but it was part of the discussion. So the right, substantive.
But that's not the purpose of minutes, though. The purpose of minutes is to record the actions that were taken in the summary. And you can say that by including all this detail, you're actually not setting yourself up potentially for legal, because somebody could take this and say, oh, well, wait a minute, Matt was on one side of this issue and Barbara's on another. It's like, let's go align with Matt now, because I'm reading this where you shouldn't be able to go through these minutes and be able to identify who's on the, that's what you're calling a summary.
I mean, Paul, let's be honest, if I'm on one side and Barbara's on the other, people are gonna align with Barbara, so.
Well, they're gonna know that they're watching YouTube, or they're going to know that, like in previous days, we have 10
I don't want to keep us here any longer, but it's like, and again, it's not a reflection of what it's like, I don't agree with the way you're putting these, and I would say that, well, I will never approve of it as long as there is much detail. I think it's too much detail. I feel that the piece as a transcript and not a summary of what's going on. So again, well, look, actually, it should be, but it's like, if that's what the board wants, that's it call. I don't think.
I think there's a happy medium between, bare bones and some substantive.
Because here's the thing, what if somebody took that, like the January 4th one, and went through and said, well, wait a minute, Sarah said something, and then Chris said something, why wasn't Chris's reflected there? Like, I don't even want to get into that, where it's like, I think it creates issues.
I mean, we're talking about hypotheticals for minutes. I don't think it's substantive. Like, we should probably just, vote on this, and that's fine. We should find that medium. But speaking purely hypothetical, of what could or could not happen in some future thing is not helpful and or hurt.
Well, I'm not talking hypothetical, I'm talking, this is what the old meeting law says, it says it's supposed to be something.
But you just said someone could take a side of it. That's not, I don't think that's for us to say. If you want to, minutes should be minutes. If it should be a summary, then it should be a summary.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. Okay, yeah, I'm fine about my time without, I think when you read the articles on why you don't do that. Yeah.
And then, and continue to discuss with Daniel, what the preferred, middle ground on that is.
It's okay with about you could actually form a subcommittee.
I'm not going to, there might be a meeting that I was. Turn it over to all this therapist. Is there any further discussion on the January 4th meeting minutes? Specifically, the January 4th meeting minutes. Any, all those in favor of approving the January 4th meeting minutes? Raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All those abstaining? The ayes have it. The minutes are approved. The next item on the agenda is correspondence. As noted, there was no correspondence. After that, we have liaison reports. Are there any liaison reports tonight? I was going to say we could mention the library. Chris, I'll let you.
Well, the library celebration in 15th. 25th of the building, 104th in the existence. Right? if I remember right. It is February, Sunday, February.
It's Saturday and Sunday, they have first both days. So is the fourth of them? Yeah, the fourth. But it was good. I'm checking right now. I got that thing. Nice. The celebration will be held Sunday, February 5th, from 1:30 to 3:30 p.m. The Steve Rudolph Trio will be playing in the main space from 2 to 3. There is a flyer that is available. Our connection is with So, the library, as noted, is holding the 25th anniversary of being in their own separate space, 145 years overall of public service. Sunday, February 5th, 1:30 to 3:30. All are welcome. Any other liaison reports? All right, other liaison reports. Our next meeting is next week, I believe. Who do we have?
Council of Aging.
Right, so 19 council on aging. Oh, we hired a new director. This meeting, we are. That's an including council on aging director. So that is what is on schedule for next Wednesday, which is February 1st. And we will also be meeting, I believe, February 8th. Or did we have February 8th off? It was one that we were talking about.
We were going to take first off, but
Okay.
this last week we didn't.
That makes sense. So February 1st, then followed by February 8th, and I believe 15th, and then the 22nd. we have off. That is our upcoming schedule for all of those who are looking to come to a fantastic night out. On Wednesday night in the middle of the week in winter. Are there any other comments, queries, questions, motions? To adjourn. We have a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Marty, seconded from Barbara. Is there any further discussion of the motion to adjourn? Any of those in favor of adjourning? It is unanimous. We are adjourned. Thank you all very much.